So some of the biggest questions surrounding bolting are, do you need to bolt? Can you rig all natural? And you wouldn't just put bolts in your friend's backyard, would you? Just walk in there without asking, drill into his patio? It'd be an eyesore. You could maybe trip over it. So why would you ever do that in a national park? I don't know. Here we go. Oh yeah, safety glasses. Now let's do this.
Hi, I'm Ryan Jinks and welcome to my gear room. After a year and a half, we're finally releasing the Bolting Bible videos. I've done a ton of homework and consulted over 20 highliners who have bolting knowledge to bring you the best bolting resource available to the highlining community. I want to give special thanks to my wife Kim Weglin and Zach Timmons for helping me edit the Bolting Bible, and the major contributions that David Kingston and Martin Roberts from Titan Climbing, he makes the titanium bolts. I messaged those guys at least over 100 times each. And thank you, Travis Warner, for rewriting my entire rock section because he is a geologist. And thank you to the 10 other people that made contributions, corrections, or given me feedback on the Bolting Bible. This is a community-based project, and I'm keeping it as an ebook/blog so we can always update it if you guys see something that needs adding or correcting. If you want to check out the Bolting Bible and follow along while we do these videos, it's on slackademics.com/Bolting Bible. It is available as a PDF on there and also in a blog format, so it's easily findable on Google. The Bolting Bible just started out as a script that I was doing for these videos because I know bolting was a hot topic in the highlining community. So I wanted to make sure it was correct, and it's hard to edit a video. You have to delete them and remake them, and it's not practical. So I wanted to make sure it was just right. So I sent it off to like 10 different highliners who I knew about bolts, and it turned into more and more and lots of information. Not everybody agreed with everything. I think everyone learned something from other people. There was never a central resource for bolting knowledge. So after all this information came in, I had to organize it really well because I wanted it to be as simple as possible for people who don't want to spend endless hours learning about bolts. It's an important topic. It's not rocket science, but there are things you do need to know to make sure that you do it right. Anyways, after spending so many hours on the script, I thought, well, people will probably want to read the information I have instead of just listening to me the entire time on a bunch of videos. So I ended up slapping on a silly cover and polishing it up a bit, which is an oversimplification of what I did for the thing. And it's now the Bolting Bible. One of the reasons there is a slackademics.com is because there was nowhere to put the Bolting Bible. So we made a website collecting everyone's information that they have put on the internet to help people learn about slacklining or highlining. And now the Bolting Bible is on slackademics.com. If you want to learn about anything about slacklining, it's on there. So why is it called the Bolting Bible? Well, there's a lot of people put in input. You're never really going to know where the information came from. And it was a cute little theme, but we threw a lot of sexual innuendos to make it fun. We're trying to keep it entertaining and educational, just like we do here on How Not to Highline. So there are some people who think you need years of experience and need to be taught in person a lot before you can install your first bolt. Now there is an element of truth to that. Just like I say, don't be an idiot and go rig your first highline by yourself, but go with someone who knows what they're doing. I also believe that about bolting. However, there are people in every country now that watch this channel, and not everyone lives next door to a guy with a bolting gun who knows what they're doing. So I want to have the information at least available to you in case you do have to be self-taught. Something funny is that everyone that I sent the bolting script to was self-taught. Now, something I did since I finished the Bolting Bible and before I started these videos was buy every bolt and glue that I recommend in the Bolting Bible. So I can literally show you how each one is installed, how they look, and how they function. So I'm really excited about having all that gear. Now, something that this video specifically is about bolting ethics. And one of those things is to practice at home. Even if you were taught by someone, practice at home or practice on a rock that doesn't matter before you go out to a place that everyone will see and install bolts that other people are going to trust their lives to. And also, like I end every episode, therefore you shouldn't highline, I'm going to say therefore you shouldn't bolt, because it is my goal that you don't bolt anything after watching these videos. After I'm done with this bolting series, I will continue to write the New Testament of the Bolting Bible, which will be how to rig all natural. Most lines do not need bolts. So I don't encourage you to go out and bolt everything just because you know how. So just like we know how abstinence is not a good strategy, it's better to teach you how to safely bolt and hope you don't. So now let's go over the 10 bolting commandments. These are the 10 main things that you should walk away with after reading the Bolting Bible. Thou shalt not drill where thou art not allowed. There are some places that you're not allowed to drill, so don't. Pretty simple. Thou shalt never place zinc-plated bolts. Zinc-plated bolts are not going to last as long as a stainless steel bolt, or even a titanium bolt if that's an option for you. So please use something that's going to last longer than you will. Thou shalt practice bolting at home and not in nature. We've already talked about that. Number 4 is thou shalt really clean thy hole after drilling, especially for a glue in. The glue needs to stick to the rock and not the dust on the side. So make sure that your holes are clean. Number 5 is thou shalt never spray thy bolts. Try to keep bolting to a minimum while staying safe. Number 6 is thou shalt test thy glue-ins after thy glue cures. I have pulled out 2 glue-ins from other people that didn't cure properly. We show you how to make sure your glue cures. Since some glues take 24 hours to dry, you want to make sure that it was done right after you leave. Number 7 is thou shalt only drill thy holes perpendicular to the rock face. You want to make sure that the hole's going straight down and not off to the side because you don't know how to hold a hammer drill correctly. Number 8, thou shalt not bring thy power drill to thy national park or wilderness areas. There are some places you cannot have powered tools, so we show you how to hand drill bolts if necessary and legal. Number 9, thou shalt never use wedge bolts in soft or fractured rock. Wedge bolts are okay in solid rock, but not okay in soft rock. And we show you the differences in the Bolting Bible. And number 10, thou shalt forever forsake polyester glue in favor of epoxy glue. There are different qualities in glue, and we cover that in this video. If in doubt, go with epoxy. So that is basically the introduction to the Bolting Bible. Now we're going to, in this video, cover the first section, which is the Book of Ethics. And it starts off with saying, thou shalt not penetrate virgin rock without feeling guilty. So highliners have a unique problem. Our bolts are on top of most things, and that's where people can see them, non-highlining people. So we have to consider the visual aspect of it. And the other thing we have to consider is that our bolts generally will have more force on them than a climbing bolt. So they have to be a wee bit more bummer than just a normal climbing bolt. So that brings us to ethics, how our bolts affect other people. Since highlining is so new, there aren't necessarily bolting laws everywhere, but we do have to consider where things might be legal-ish, but frowned upon. For example, United States national parks aren't too keen on having more bolts added. The top of climbing areas are also not somewhere you might want to add bolts because that kind of affects the climbing route that's already been established there. If a crag area is an all-natural, no bolting area, then for us to add bolts might be a problem. Single-use highlines, the ones that won't be rigged often, should probably be rigged all natural. And it might not be a good idea to install a bunch of bolts where a bunch of tourists can see them at a lookout point. Now, there aren't a lot of laws regarding our bolting, but there are some. So please make sure that you know the rules of an area before you go to it. For example, in Yosemite, there are no power tools allowed. It's good to know that before you go start drilling there. If you do choose to bolt a highline area, and it's ethically okay to do so, thank you for taking your time and money for making it an option for other people to highline there. Just please pick the spot carefully and consider, does that spot need bolts or can you use removables? Consider the quality of rock and what kind of bolts need to be placed there. Can you strategically place those bolts so that minimizes the no-fall zone or minimizes how well they can be seen by non-highliners? Can you do a mix of natural anchor and bolts? Maybe only one side needs bolts and the other side can easily be rigged all natural. If the bolts conflict with a climbing route, can the bolts be placed elsewhere to avoid conflict and confusion? And please consider if there are already a bunch of lines in this area. Putting bolts 10 feet away from another set of bolts doesn't necessarily constitute a new line. Okay, now that we talked about the rules and the area, let's talk about the number one risk of any bolt failing. You are the number one risk of any bolt failing. Please understand that it is a huge responsibility to install a bolt that is almost impossible to inspect that other people will depend their lives on. Now that I've learned a lot about bolting, I show up to a new area and I see the bolts and think, sure hope they knew what they were doing when those were put in. So realize what kind of role that you're playing and respect the responsibility, educate yourself, and please practice. So when I first started, I practiced a lot, but I didn't practice enough. So it was just struggle city when I went out to bolt my first highline. A great place to practice is at home in your concrete. If you are going to use a rock, please use a rock that not everyone's going to see. Now, if your first thought is, I don't want ugly bolt holes at my house, then you're well on your way to understand some people's issues with our bolts in nature. So go ahead and spend the money on a tube of glue and see how the stuff mixes, how the shit gets everywhere, and to make sure that your caulk gun fits the tube of glue. Now, if you don't want a glue-in bolt in your yard for the next 50 years, you can pull it out before it cures and use some goof off to clean it out. If you are going to have to hand drill a bolt, I recommend you do one in your yard, just so you can see how much is involved and that you practice keeping it straight. And if you do use mechanical bolts, practice using with a torque wrench and then a normal wrench, so if you don't take a torque wrench up the mountain with you, you know how tight to make them. So please practice. So that basically covers bolting ethics. But I do want to encourage you to try to rig all natural if possible. It's not rocket science. There's no magic behind it. You can use gear like cams, nuts, tri-cams. Just put in a lot. Like isolate 3, and another 3,